Last week was a roller coaster for Five Nights at Freddy's fans. First off, 90% of the fanbase, myself included, thought a new FNAF game was going to be announced at the PlayStation State of Play. This doesn't always happen, but most of the most recent releases of FNAF have been announced at States of Play, and a very well-renowned leaker in the Spanish-speaking community made a post that somebody translated and misunderstood and thought a FNAF game was going to be on it. And then when the State of Play happened, every other game on that list got announced except for the FNAF game. But the leaker then later clarified that he never said FNAF was going to be announced. He said a game about a 10-year anniversary is going to be announced. And it turns up it was that dress-up Genshin Impact game thing. But the very next day after that disappointment, we got an interview with Jason Topolski, or J-Top, from Steel Wool Studios by John FNAF. For those who don't know, Jason is the creative director and co-creator of Steel Wool Studios. The link to that interview is in the description below, and I'll try to remember to put a card right here. I highly recommend you watch the whole interview because it's really, really good. Great job, John, by the way. But it gives you a great insight onto the back end of Steel Wool Studios, the development process, and what we're going to discuss about today, the lore. I'm only going to be going into the seemingly out of nowhere massive lore drops that came from this interview. Now, going into this, keep in mind this is an interview and it's stuff people said, not planned things inside of a video game. So when you talk about stuff like this, it gets a little parasocially and psychoanalytical, where you're trying to guess what people meant by the words they said. So take it with a grain of salt. It is an interview, not like a planned, here we're put this in a video game specifically for X, Y, and Z reason kind of thing. But some huge lore points were brought up and we have to talk about it. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. And keep in mind what Jason himself said.
I would suggest that people that might get incensed or a little bit adamant about their point of view, that this is the only correct answer, it has to be this, and then they push other people down, or they're so opinionated and they can't change their minds or anything, that people need to be a little more malleable. They need to be a little bit more open.
So just be cool. Also, happy Pride! As a reminder, I'm non-binary, I go by any pronouns because I don't really know if I have a gender at this point, and I am pansexual. And if you have a problem with Pride, go fuck yourself, you're not welcome in this community. Bye! Let's start with some of the more general things that aren't direct information, but still good to know and especially worthwhile if you're going to be theory crafting. In the development of Security Breach, one of the main goals was to show us a functional and nice to be at Pizzaplex to then contrast it with what is going to be ruined later. That way when we see it broken and in disrepair, it's more impactful. Jason even goes on to say,
Ruined specifically evolved.
Okay.
But we always knew that the story didn't end there.
Right. You always knew you'd need some DLC.
Wanted to do DLC.
So even though Ruin wasn't specifically planned when Security Breach was in development, they always had an idea that they wanted to revisit this Pizzaplex within this game to show that decrepitness. And we even see a microcosm of this idea within Security Breach itself, giving us the Glamrock animatronics, which are at times threatening but not scary, and then giving us their shattered forms that are more frightening. Going more into Security Breach and its design, he also lets us know that there are parts of Security Breach that either seem insignificant or don't make a lot of sense, specifically because they are linked to things that will be revealed later on in later games. The example he gives is Gravity Falls, an amazing show, but one that's very, very dense. And later on in that show, when we got reveals of mysteries like Bill Cipher and the Stanford twins and all of this stuff, little things from early episodes of that series started to make more sense and have more context to them. So he's saying the kind of same thing will happen to Security Breach, where, for example, maybe those dens of people who worshipped specific animatronics, that might come up later. Or even the silo. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's a lot of different ways you can interpret the silo. That might just be on purpose because it'll be revealed in a later game. And speaking of little details like that, they make it very clear that they do a very thorough job in making sure there aren't any accidental leads or red herrings. Now, there are some purposeful red herrings like any story has, but there's a whole conversation about how members of the team will check each other and check themselves when doing set design and character design and placing things in the world to make sure they don't accidentally imply something. Things like, oh, maybe don't make this room purple because of XYZ. So when you're going through Security Breach and noticing little details, have a little faith in yourself, because they did put those there for a reason. Now, granted, he also explains that some things just go there because you need to build a game. But if you see something, say something. Who knows? You might just be right. And before we move on, to clear up some miscommunication I've seen online, at some point Jason brings up what he calls YouTube bait. And some people took this as there are things in these games that don't mean anything, but are specifically there to farm engagement. That's not what he said. Play the clip again.
I'll make these comments where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this thing in YouTuber bait. People are gonna
YouTuber
love
bait?
it. Oh yeah, I have YouTuber bait. I'm like, people are gonna love this. And I'm like,
that.
I'm gonna put this thing in here and people are gonna love this.
Listening to the words he says, he never says YouTube bait is inherently false or purposely misleading. What it seems to me, and again, this is just kind of psychoanalyzing somebody else's words here, but it seems like what he's trying to say is there are specific reveals placed there that will give good reactions to the YouTube community. For example, when he first said this, a lot of folks in chat, myself included, mentioned the Nightmare Own plushes. And some people go, okay, the Nightmare Own plushes don't mean anything, they're there to bait YouTubers to talk about them. I don't think that's what he's saying. The Nightmare Own plushes mean something, but when he says YouTube bait, it's probably referring to the one in Princess Quest 4. It most likely means something that it's there, but how many great reactions have you seen of YouTubers and Let's Players and live streamers playing that game and seeing that motherfucker in Princess Quest 4 and freaking out about it? That's what I think YouTube bait means here. Not incorrect or misleading, but just intentionally put to give a big reveal. But that's enough general information from the interview. Let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this video. And we'll start with what is admittedly the biggest stretch of the points I'm going to make, but we'll get into the bigger and bigger reveals as the video goes on. The other points I make in this video are direct statements from Jason about the games, but this one is more of an implication. When talking about Chica's voice box from Security Breach Ruin, an interesting phrase was used. John asked if Chica's voice box was originally part of a grander side mission on Ruin to repair all 4 animatronics. And Jason's response was very interesting.
Well, you can play it where you do.
You help Ruin?
You're helping them all. Like
in Ruin.
In Ruin. When you compare like Gregory to Cassie is she's like the healer, repairs. She helps. Her natural inclination is to help the animatronics.
Yes. I could see Chica, I could see Roxy.
Yeah.
Freddy, she's kind of was
too far gone.
That's too far gone.
Too far gone.
Yeah.
But
Monty?
Too far.
So that doesn't really
Yeah, Monty's too far gone. But
yeah.
But Chica and Roxy, she's able to.
Right.
It's like, why did she put herself in so much danger for her friend?
This gives us, honestly, a lot of characterization and information about Gregory and Cassie and the way they function in the story. For one, it instantly sets up a dynamic between Cassie and Gregory as foils. But think about the implication of what this could mean. If you view Ruin as Cassie fixing the things that Gregory has done, then what we encounter is Gregory's fault, or something that happened in Security Breach. Now think about why this would matter with specifically the animatronics. If Freddy is too far gone to be repaired by Cassie because of what Gregory has done, that means the Freddy we see in Ruin is the same Freddy we saw in Security Breach. And if this Freddy and Ruin Freddy are the same animatronic, then that is incredibly solid evidence that the Princess Quest 3 ending from Security Breach is the canon one. When Ruin came out, there was a big debate about what the game says about the endings of Security Breach. After all, we find comic book pages drawn by Gregory about all of the other endings in Security Breach except for Princess Quest 3. And we see Freddy with the exact same damage in the exact same location of the Princess Quest 3 ending, even without a head, which is taken away in the good Vanny ending. So some people, myself included, assumed Princess Quest 3 to be the canon ending, but there is good counter evidence for this. this. After all, there's Vanny graffiti all over the Pizzaplex after security breach. So in the good Princess Quest ending, Vanny is destroyed. How is that possible? Furthermore, on the foot of the Freddy in Ruin, there's a prototype stamp, one that is not visible in security breach. We don't see that at all. So there was talks that this might not even be the same Freddy, and thus no definitive answer on which ending from security breach is canon. And to be clear, there still isn't a definitive answer. But if what Jason is suggesting here is true, and this Freddy is this Freddy, then the Princess Quest 3 ending being the canon security breach ending makes the most logical sense, which gives us a lot of information. For one, Vanessa is freed from Vanny and Glitchtrap, and her, Gregory, and Freddy's head escaped from the Pizzaplex. But if that's true, then what about the Vanny graffiti? And how does Vanny show up in Help Wanted 2, a game that pretty much has to take place after security breach? Oh, we'll get to that. Another point, if Princess Quest 3 is canon, what about the prototype stamp on Freddy's foot? Is it possible that the Help Wanted 2 protagonist put that there when trying to repair animatronics? We're not even sure if he was repairing animatronics, but with what he does with Roxy and Roxy's Salon, and Chica's hand being next to a toolbox, it seems likely. So maybe the prototype stamp was part of that. Not to mention, if the Help Wanted 2 protagonist is Cassie's dad like many believe, it would further link them together. If Cassie is a healer, so is her father. And we know that Cassie's father had a Faz wrench, which is something Fazbear technicians had, and if he was a Fazbear technician, he would have the knowledge necessary to try to repair these animatronics. But that's not all we learn about Ruin from this interview. Up until this moment in the interview, we mostly got vague hints to lore and talks about non-lore stuff from FNAF, and Jason was being very careful as to not confirm anything. But then he said this.
The MXES machine in Ruin. I'm not going to ask, like, what does MXES stand for, because I know that's a big secret, but I've noticed, and I feel like people in the community have noticed, that it looks a lot like the
Whopper.
The Whopper machine from the 1983 movie War Games.
Yeah.
Was this intentional? And how often when creating your games do you reference back to like movies from your past?
You know, there's always good reference in other movies and television,
Right.
or images, the time periods that you're looking at. That is deliberately supposed to be an older machine. So
Okay.
the Whopper being like a good example of like, hey, here's a supercomputer, right?
But it's old.
Before computers are like this big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? MXES was intentionally designed to look like a much older piece of technology. And when I tell you this question made me feel so vindicated, you gotta believe me, because I've been saying this. Look at the build of this machine. Everything in this room is older. The forklift, the canisters in the back, even the console. But the MXES machine is aged. It is rusty and bulkier than anything in that room. The paneling even is reminiscent of that 70s stained glass tile system that a lot of aesthetics used back then. This thing is much older than the rest of the technology in here, or at least has been here for a good time longer. Sure, plenty of people have been saying this, but I've had people in my comments be like, nah, that's just a random coincidence, you're crazy. Now, it should be noted, in the past I used this connection to imply the purpose of the MXES machine, because in war games, the Whopper machine is essentially an AI program that's training itself on war data to give up the best possible solutions for wartime strategy, which kind of sounds like the Mimic. And that's still a worthwhile connection, but Jason is clear here that this is more so a reference to how a lot of supercomputers from media at the time looked, not necessarily specifically Whopper, but drawing that connection is still useful for many reasons. After all, War Games came out in 1983, showing us what people thought supercomputers looked like at the time, which would place the creation of MXES somewhere in the late 70s to early 80s. This may even link it up to the creation of the Mimic. After all, Gregory in Ruin states that the Mimic is very old and they're not quite sure what it is. And in Tales from the Pizzaplex, Edwin Murray creates the Mimic when they're still creating other animatronics for Fazbear, which not only implies that the Mimic is very old, after all, he's very old in the modern Tales stories, but that means the MXES machine could be as old as the Mimic itself is. But if it is, what was it used for? After all, in Ruin, the MXES machine conceals and traps the Mimic in the basement, but those uses of it are modern. It's in an AR world with nodes and use the Faz wrench and the Vanny mask, all pieces of technology that are novel to the security breach Pizzaplex. So I still think it's possible that Vanessa or Vanny or Gregory, or hell, Cassie's dad, could have been the one to modify the MXES machine to trap the Mimic in the basement. But as far as what it was originally built for and its original purpose, It's hard to say. I still think that it was most likely made by Henry, but that's mainly because I think Henry also created the Mimic in the game's timeline. If you believe the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are fully canon, then I feel like your best option would be Edwin Murray for the MXES machine. But regardless, it's hard to nail down what the purpose of this machine was originally intended for. Maybe just to create the Mimic 1 program? It's hard to say. And finally, I saved possibly the biggest reveal for last. One of the most direct and repeated and clarified quotes in the entire interview.
For, when we were talking about endings and resolutions for, instead of having a giant Vanny,
Yeah.
turning around and
Yep.
being, this is, the end of Glitchtrap.
Yeah. So it is the end of Glitchtrap. Squished. Gone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Holy shit, ding dong, the glitch is dead. You shed so much. Yeah, a bit of behind the scenes, there's like a 8-hour difference between recordings. And oh my god, I brush you so much and yet you shed even more. So is this true? Is the era of Glitchtrap over? Is that character dead and gone? Well, unfortunately, as always, it's not that cut and dry. After all, that's one of 2 possible endings for Help Wanted 2. Meanwhile, the other ending of the game leads directly into Ruin and seems like the more likely ending to be canon, because the result of that ending is Cassie getting the Vanny mask that we see at the beginning of Ruin. And that ending is the one where we see Glitchtrap exiting a charging pod, which definitely doesn't feel like he's dying. So if that ending is the canon one, which feels very likely at the moment, then Glitchtrap can't be dead. But what if he is? Let's take Jason at his word for a moment and assume that Help Wanted 2 is the end of Glitchtrap. Well then, what happens now? How did that even happen? Who did it? Like, we see Vanny do it, but that can't be right? After all, if this Freddy is this Freddy, then Princess Quest 3 is the most likely ending for Security Breach. But if Princess Quest 3 was beaten, then Vanny should be gone. So is this actually Vanessa? It would make sense for Vanessa to want to destroy Glitchtrap. I mean, he basically ruined her life and killed several people to boot. This could be Vanessa pretending to be Vanny to get close to Glitchtrap. Or maybe when in a digital space, Vanessa still appears as Vanny. But even if that's true, which we have no evidence for that being true, would Vanessa really kill an innocent person? That ending seems very somber, with likely Cassie's dad being left in a digital space forever. Sure, Glitchtrap is destroyed, but he's left to rot as well. It's something that happens very often in the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, somebody dying while in a VR or AR experience and their consciousness remaining. But would Vanessa do that to an innocent person? Does she see Cassie's dad as too far gone and too infected from Glitchtrap to be able to save? Or does she think the life of one person is worth sacrificing to potentially save dozens to hundreds of lives if Glitchtrap is left to do whatever he wants? After all, it's not like she just came up upon this situation and made a quick decision. In the game files, there were lines that were never implemented that are likely to be from Vanny, leading us to this ending. So it was intended that she would have been telling us to do this all along. Either way, it seems like a premeditated act. So did Vanessa doom Cassie's dad forever to kill Glitchtrap? I'm not sure, but it would line up in a way with Ruin. After all, what appears to be Gregory leaves Cassie to rot in a basement in order to thwart the Mimic, and what appears to be Vanny is leaving Cassie's dad to rot in some digital space in order to thwart Glitchtrap. But that's if Vanessa did it. What if our eyes aren't deceiving us and Vanny is the one that does this? Well, the first question has to be why. Vanny was the most loyal follower Glitchtrap ever had. Sure, Vanessa is the reluctant follower, but the reluctant part was from Vanessa. Vanny was the follower. Vanny was created by Glitchtrap to serve Glitchtrap. Why would she ever betray him? And how would she even do that if Princess Quest 3 is canon? Well, the only explanation I can think of that would explain both points is something that we learn from the books. Specifically B7-2. In that story, to make it incredibly brief, a boy named Billy starts adopting the persona of B7 in animatronic, and he makes physical modifications to his body to be more like an animatronic. However, eventually when it goes too far, they are removed from his body medically in one large piece all by itself, and that persona that developed in his mind, B7, goes along with it. So even though Billy is fully removed and separated and alive, B7 is separately alive in those pieces and is seeking a new host. But by the end of the story, the grandma pretends to not know any better and allows B7 to merge with her. She then reveals that she knew B7 was trying to merge with Billy and that she was terminally ill. So instead, she tricked B7 to merge with her, and then she threw herself from the stairs and died, killing her and B7 in the process. So why does this matter? Well, if this can be applied to any persona made within someone's mind, if Princess Quest 3 was beaten and Vanessa leaves the Vanny mask at the Pizzaplex, Vanessa might think that Vanny is no longer, but Vanny may still be conscious, trapped in that mask, waiting for its next host. Then eventually, someone who worked at the Pizzaplex comes back to see what happened and try to help the animatronics, and the Vanny mask finds its new host, Cassie's dad. I'm gonna refer to him a lot, and I don't want to say Cassie's dad every 5 seconds. So, real quick, I personally believe that Cassie's dad is also the Bonnie bully from the FNAF 4 Nightmares. I also think that Cassie's dad is Jeremy Fitzgerald from FNAF 2. All this to say, I think the protagonist from Help Wanted 2 is Cassie's father, named Jeremy Fitzgerald, and Cassie's full name would be Cassie Fitzgerald. So, moving forward for the rest of this video, I'm just gonna say Jeremy when referring to the Help Wanted 2 protagonist. When Jeremy finds the Vanny mask and puts it on, although Vanny would want to take over his mind, Glitchtrap likely had other plans that we see in Help Wanted 2. The main ending we see where you collect these toys, Glitchtrap somehow materializes in a way, and then Cassie retrieves the Vanny mask. But if this were to happen, Vanny would be discarded. It seems like Glitchtrap is the one taking the reins. So instead, secretly through this mask, Vanny reaches out to Jeremy and instructs him to collect separate things to save the Pizzaplex, and he finds Princess Quest 4 in doing so. And once he's as deep as it goes in that vulnerable transient VR state, he allows for Glitchtrap to take over his mind. But while they're in there, Vanny just has to leave them both behind. Once they're trapped in that digital space and Glitchtrap has melded with Cassie's dad's mind, Jeremy's mind, then Vanny just can kill them right there, killing them both and freeing herself from any influence, becoming her own character. And once that's done, she just needs to find one new host. And that's why, even though Jeremy has a Vanny mask in Help Wanted 2, the beginning of Ruins sees the animatronics trying to find a new host for the Vanny mask, because Vanny can finally take over someone's mind herself. But I hear you. We see Cassie retrieve the mask in the main ending of Help Wanted 2. How could she retrieve it in the other one? My best guess? No matter what, Cassie retrieves a Vanny mask and her mind becomes overpowered by something. Help Wanted 2 is here to show us the two possibilities. In one order of events, Jeremy listens to Glitchtrap, is taken over by him, and subserviently puts Cassie under the same spell. But in the timeline we're in, one that Jason seems to imply by saying Glitchtrap is dead, once Glitchtrap enters Jeremy's mind, Vanny kills them both, destroying Glitchtrap and having the ability to take over her mind completely herself, and gives the mask to Cassie to take over her mind. This could line up pretty well with the final tease we get in the interview. John asked Jason if he had any preparations or plans or celebrations for the FNAF 10th anniversary this year, and Jason very slyly says carrot cake, just eating carrot cake, and even mentions that it's Cassie's favorite. I don't think we've seen the last of Cassie, and I think this teaser is backing that up. In fact, I think we might just see the inverse of what happened with Security Breach, doubling down on Cassie and Gregory being foils of each other. In Security Breach, we see Gregory and Glamrock Freddy being a duo as the protagonists of the game. But in the next Five Nights at Freddy's Steel Wool game, we might see Cassie as Vanny and the Mimic being a duo of antagonists. Regardless of what you think of my admittedly wild speculation near the end there, the near confirmation that the MXES machine is much older than we had figured, and that Glitchtrap is dead, is huge. So do with that information what you will. And I didn't touch on everything that was in the interview. I didn't even touch on all the lore little tidbits from the interview. Obviously, there is so much more useful and interesting information in that interview. It's an hour and a half, for God's sakes. Go watch it. It's really good. Again, John, you did an amazing job. And Steelwool, thank you for the little crumbs of information. In the meantime, if you're a little lost on what I was referring to when talking about the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, I just did 2 videos videos going over all the lore that's relevant to the timeline that I could find from those books. So you can see those videos right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #RideTart. A huge shout out to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.